these truths to be self-evident.
That all men are created equal.
As a member of Congress, I get to have a lot of really interesting people in the office. Experts on what they're talking about.
This is the podcast
for insights into the issues.
China, bioterrorism, Medicare for all. In-depth discussions.
Breaking it down into simple terms. We hold
these truths.
With Dan Crenshaw.
The Eagle has landed.
SITREP, number 11, the situation report, just the news. A lot of news you may not have heard right here in about 20 minutes. So today we're going to go over White House changes to federal union bargaining requirements and, of course, some other staffing changes in the executive branch. The Greenland gambit and what's going on there. Some House rules drama. You'll hear about that. Some special elections, some House makeup changes, and the U.S.-Mexico water dispute. So let's go. Actually, before we hit any of that, let's talk about some of the biggest news this week, which is Trump's tariffs. On Wednesday at 4 p.m. from the Rose Garden, President Trump announced his Liberation Day tariffs. The president announced a 10% universal tariff on all goods, barring certain exemptions, imported into America starting on April 5th. The president also announced significant discounted reciprocal tariffs on about 60 countries starting on April 9th. These reciprocal tariffs are designed to be roughly half of what other countries charge the U.S. in tariffs, currency manipulation, and other trade barriers. The announced reciprocal tariffs include 20% on goods imported from the EU, 54% on Chinese goods, and a 46% tariff on goods from Vietnam. The president also announced a 25% tariff on all foreign-made automobiles. For folks listening who haven't previously been following these trade discussions, let's review why President Trump wants these reciprocal tariffs on other countries. So he's advocated for increased tariffs on imported goods as a way to tackle several policy issues simultaneously. These include pressuring neighboring countries like Canada and Mexico to enhance their border security measures, halting the shipment of fentanyl precursor chemicals from China, rectifying trade imbalances with other nations, and reshoring American manufacturing. Additionally, White House officials like senior economic advisor Peter Navarro have argued that these tariffs will generate hundreds of billions of dollars in revenue for the federal government. Now, the critics disagree. They say that imposing broad tariff increases could raise consumer prices on a wide range of goods manufactured partly or entirely abroad. And yes, that is a lot of goods in today's supply chains. It also warned that tariffs could contribute to inflation and increase uncertainty in financial markets and uncertainty in future investment. Tariffs are, again, like anything that is effectively a tax, there are trade-offs. It will benefit some things. It will have costs in other places. Of course, that's not the only big moves the Trump administration is making lately. Last Thursday, President Trump issued an executive order exempting agencies with a national security mission from federal collective bargaining requirements. Shortly afterward, legacy media outlets declared that the president had begun a war on federal government workers. Unsurprisingly, they're sensationalizing a little bit, and I think attacking what is common sense reform when it comes to the federal union issue. So let's talk about what that even is. So this executive order will ensure that federal unions who have recently made it their mission to obstruct changes by the Trump administration won't jeopardize America's national security. Now, you see, since passing the 1978 Civil Service Reform Act, which generally allows unions to bargain with agencies on behalf of government employees, federal worker unions have sued, delayed, and obstructed even those basic attempts to improve efficiency or accountability. As a result, they've made bad actors within the government pretty much unfireable, and they've also contributed to massive bloat. We've seen that across agencies. For instance, in August of 2023, the Biden White House Chief of Staff, Jeff Zients, directed federal agencies to end COVID-era telework policies and return federal employees to in-person work after massive backlogs became a norm across all agencies. Now, if you tried to get your passport renewed around that time, you know firsthand how bad it got. But agencies just didn't comply. The big federal unions told President Biden that telework and remote work were their right, so they wouldn't come back to the office. And the Biden administration backed off. So that's how much of a stranglehold these unions have had over their employers. So what does President Trump's executive order actually change? It allows him to rework the union-employer relationship if the agency involved is charged with intelligence or national security, citing a provision from the same Civil Service Reform Act previously mentioned. You can understand why this might be necessary when the single largest federal union, AFGE, has filed over 70 frivolous lawsuits against the administration. Pretty unprecedented number. So this isn't some anti-labor move that the media wants you to believe. It's another step in right-sizing the federal government and protecting our national security. I might also mention the intelligence community writ large actually involves a lot more agencies than you realize. It can involve Treasury. It can involve the Department of Energy. All of these different departments have an element of the IC involved, which of course is national security. So that's a significant change. Related to that, speaking of reducing bloat, of course, a lot of changes to the Department of Health and Human Services this week, undergoing significant restructuring under RFK Jr., resulting in the layoff of about 10,000 employees, or 20% of its workforce. A lot of concern over this. They basically showed up that day and told that they didn't have a job anymore. And, worth remembering that whether we agree with this or not, these are still regular people who now have no certainty in their future. I'm not sure that's the best. Even if I agree with firing 10,000 employees and right-sizing the size of the agency, I'm not sure that was the best way to do it. This initiative aims to streamline operations and reduce inefficiencies, including consolidating 28 divisions into 15 and creating the new administration for a healthy America. Key agencies affected included the FDA, CDC, NIH, and CMS. Critics expressed concerns about potential negative impacts on public health services and research. Now, HHS did put out a memo trying to explain what it had done. It noted some things like this. The workforce just in the last few years has ballooned by 17%. Last year alone spent $1.7 trillion, more than any other federal agency. Now, keep in mind, it also has Medicaid and Medicare under it, so that's the huge bulk of that. It's spending that money by giving that money to senior citizens and using it on their Medicare. But despite all that spending, our health levels really aren't going up. Obesity rates are through the roof, and there's a number of statistics that they point out that things just aren't improving. They point out a few instances where you just don't need these, you don't need 1,400 external affair officers, maybe not. But I think their point would be that you're right-sizing the workforce to look the same as just, 4 years ago. Now back to Greenland. So Greenland resurfaced in the news last Friday after Vice President J.D. Vance visited a U.S. Space Force base on the semi-autonomous island. He was joined by his wife, National Security Advisor Mike Waltz, and Secretary of Energy Chris Wright. So what's been going on here? National security is still a key concern with Greenland. Chinese and Russian ships have near uncontested control of the Arctic Ocean, and Greenland-Iceland-UK gap is considered important by us for maritime defense along the eastern United States. There's also the issue of critical minerals, with Greenland having the largest deposits of rare earths outside China. These matter because they're critical for most, if not all, modern technology, everything from smartphones to LEDs to medical devices and defense systems. China controlling a monopoly could restrict our advancements and leave us at their mercy. The main concern of President Trump is Denmark, which Greenland has been a territory of for some 300 years. It believes they won't do, President Trump believes they won't do what's necessary to defend Greenland from Chinese and Russian economic or military threats. After all, Denmark spends the NATO bare minimum of 2% on defense and can't project power anyway with that to protect the distant territory. President Trump has not ruled out how Greenland would join the U.S., although he offered to buy it from Denmark at the end of his last term. But although he has also reiterated his support for Greenlanders to determine their future. Now back to Washington, D.C., where I work in the House of Representatives. I'll give you sort of a somewhat advanced class on how a bill might become a law in the House. So this comes after my friend and colleague, Florida Congresswoman Paulina Luna, successfully discharged a resolution this week which offers proxy voting to expecting parents against the will of Speaker Mike Johnson. So there's a lot of ways for a bill to become a law. The normal way is to introduce it. It goes to the Committee of Jurisdiction. You have a hearing on it. It gets marked up. It gets reported to the floor. Then the Speaker decides in the end what comes to the floor. And then you vote on it, and hopefully the Senate votes on it, and it becomes a law after it's signed by the president. Okay, that's just the basic way, but there's other ways too. Now, one of those ways is what's called a discharge petition. That means 218 members, which is a simple razor-thin majority, sign a petition on a certain bill. That means that the attached bill bypasses its assigned committees and leadership, goes directly to the Rules Committee to be scheduled for a floor vote. Okay, it's a simple rule. It's been around a long time. Nobody's ever gotten rid of it, but it is an opportunity for the will of the majority to vote on a bill that they want voted on. It takes a lot to get 218 people. but it's a methodology to be able to vote on something. I ended up supporting Ms. Paulina Luna's discharge petition. My honest story there was she asked me to. She's a friend. I don't think it's a massive sway in the wrong direction if new parents are allowed to take some time off to be with their newborn. I obviously just had a baby. She just had a baby about the same age as mine. And also, there's just not that many people in Congress having babies. This is a pretty rare thing. It's an older crowd, as you might imagine. So, I think a lot of the doomsday opening Pandora's box rhetoric about this particular issue, the slippery slope fallacy, like, well, if you do it this way, then people can just get a cold and they don't have to come in. No, that's a foolish argument. You can obviously stand your ground and your principled ground at the time. Like it's not a slippery slope. But this did escalate. So I signed it. I didn't think much of it. And all of a sudden, a couple of weeks later, it has turned into quite the drama. She did clear the 218 threshold, which means that it has to come to the floor. So if the rule passes, now you always have a rule before an actual piece of legislation, and that was written by the Rules Committee. That's why the Rules Committee is powerful, because in theory it can block a lot of legislation. That rule says things like how long debate will last. It's just a rule of how that will be voted on. So what Speaker Johnson did was actually propose a rule in the Rules Committee that essentially said that there would never be allowed a discharge petition to the floor if it concerned proxy voting, because proxy voting is unconstitutional. Now, even members who didn't support what Anna was doing said, hey, hold on, wait a second. You can't just start changing rules around when something happens within the scope of those rules that you don't like. Because that'll open up the Pandora's box. If you want to talk about Pandora's boxes, just wait till Democrats have the majority and we try to use something on them. Well, they're just going to change the rules. Remember, this happened when Democrats didn't like the way the rules were for the filibuster in the Senate, and they changed the rules for Supreme Court justices in the Senate. So instead of 60 votes, you only needed 50 plus one. And what happened? Well, Mitch McConnell just ran over him with a bus over the next few years. He said, you'll regret this. And indeed, they did regret it. When Republicans got the majority, well, we got to use that rule that the Democrats created. And we got to pack the Supreme Court with good conservative judges in Trump's first term. So we know, because it's benefited us, that you got to be careful what you wish for. Don't think that these short-term wins mean long-term wins. It might bite you in the you-know-what. And so that was quite a bold move by the speaker to do that. And he also packaged it within other rules for other good legislation that I wanted to vote for. Things like the new legislation that would stop the activist judges from putting injunctions on Trump policies with just one judge, right? It would require like 3 judges or a panel. Some really good legislation. In the end, they packaged it all together, which means if that rule fails, well, you don't even get to vote on any of those pieces of legislation, whether it's the proxy, the new mother's proxy voting legislation that Anna Paulina wanted us to vote on, or the good legislation around activist judges. And so what ended up happening was that we all just went home because the legislating was at a standstill this week. We'll see what happens next week. There's reports that the speaker is going to double down and attach the rule. Again, the rule would kill Anna Paulina Luna's bill that came out of the discharge petition. And he's going to kill it by attaching it to one big, beautiful reconciliation bill, which he believes members will just have a harder time voting against. Further escalation, we'll see what happens with this. Also in House news, President Trump's nominee for ambassador to the United Nations, Elise Stefanik, she's a Republican member from upstate New York, is withdrawing her consideration for the position. She'll return to the House to protect the GOP's slim margins of the majority. Because if you know anything about the House right now, you understand how close the margins are between Democrats and Republicans. It's thin. 218 to 213. That margin was tight after the November 5th elections, but it got worse when Elise and two other House Republicans, Matt Gaetz and Michael Waltz, resigned for administration postings. Gaetz withdrew his name from consideration after he resigned, and Waltz is serving as National Security Advisor. But they're both from Florida, where Republican Governor Ron DeSantis made sure the special elections to fill their seats were done quickly. Tuesday night, those races concluded with GOP nominees Randy Fine and Jimmy Patronis winning special elections in Florida's 6th and 1st districts. Now, Elise is from New York, and the odds that Democrat Governor Kathy Hochul would quickly move to fill her seat are slim, jeopardizing Republican control of the House and reducing the margin for Speaker Johnson. As a result, President Trump and Elise jointly announced that she would withdraw from consideration for UN ambassador and remain in her position in Congress. Before being nominated, Elise was the Republican conference chair, the number 4 person in House leadership, but since she left for the administration, that position has been filled. And some good news for her, President Trump has signaled that she will rejoin House leadership. Elise is a friend, and I'm looking forward to working with her again. Now that she's back and the Florida special elections have finished, Republicans will have slightly more favorable margins of the House in the House with 221 to 213. Also in election news in Wisconsin, along with Florida, on Tuesday night, liberals held on to the Wisconsin Supreme Court, keeping their 4-3 majority. The Wisconsin Supreme Court race saw liberal Judge Susan Crawford defeat conservative Brad Schimel in the most expensive judicial race in U.S. history. Overall, looked like the race cost about $90 million. All right, let's turn our attention back home to Texas. Now, what do tariffs, drugs, immigration, guns, and water all have in common? They're issues of contention between the U.S. and Mexico. After Mexico failed to deliver the required amount of water to the United States for 5 years straight, the U.S. is denying Mexico's request for water for the first time in 80 years. So let's break it down. In 1944, the U.S. and Mexico signed a treaty to share water, with Mexico getting 1.5 million acre-feet of water from the Colorado River each year, and the U.S. being allocated 1.75 million acre-feet of water from the Rio Grande River every 5 years. Each acre-foot equals 325,000 gallons of water, so we're talking about hundreds of billions of gallons of water. Mexico has been experiencing a severe drought for several years and struggled to supply its agriculture with the water it needs, leading to a 6.1% decrease in production. The drought has been so bad for so long that in 2020, farmers in Chihuahua rioted and even sabotaged a dam. The U.S. State Department, charged with implementing the treaty, is denying the transfer because Mexico hasn't complied with its end of the deal, delivering only a quarter of its obligation. That has left South Texas agriculture in a tough spot, causing the last Rio Grande sugar growers mill to shut down last year. As a friend once said, Mexico and the U.S. are like an old married couple. The only choice is to make it work because divorce just isn't an option. Now, if you read nothing else, here's an interesting one for you. Gerard Baker's article, Faith, Freedom, and the Long Thread of Technology, in the Wall Street Journal this week. It's an interesting read on the intersection between faith and technology. The link will be down below. Thanks.